My name is Nancy. Welcome to my channel, Running with Scissors. In today's video, I brought my roommate Karen back, and she's going to show you how to make cards with her embossing machine. If that sounds interesting to you, don't go away. Okay, I want to introduce you to my roommate, Karen, my old college roommate. We won't say how old. Come on in, Karen.
Okay.
And she's going to explain to you how she makes the cards. Show her the cards that you
Okay, this is what
finished.
I'm going to demonstrate today from start to finish, how to make these cards.
Yeah, let's put them way up here.
There we go.
Here we go. And she's going to show you from start to finish with her embossing machine how she makes her cards. So don't go away, and she'll show you how she does it.
The last video we did, I showed you about 120 different materials and ways you could use an embossing machine with one folder and showing how versatile it is. And we discussed making the cards front to finish. Today's technique that you're going to see is opposites. These two cards are made similarly, but the embossing procedure is opposite. And I'm going to go through the process and you'll explain to you how you can make a card like this. This is just one of many techniques that you can do with an embossing folder. So let's get started. Hello everyone, and I'm back again. Nancy invited me to do a follow-up video when I came to visit again, and today we're doing a carved wood technique. There are two versions of the carved wood technique, which are opposites. And I'm going to demonstrate how to do both of these cards today. Before we get into the actual card making, I'm going to point out the differences between the cards. The bases are the same, the concept for the embellishments are the same, but if you look at the backgrounds, this card, the wood grain shows white between the boards, whereas in this image, the wood grain shows dark between the boards. And if you look at this closely, the floral engraved image is elevated on this side and it's depressed on this side. So technically they're mirror images. Recessed lines, elevated image, recessed image. So we're going to do these cards one at a time, and I'll show you how to use an embossing machine to do both techniques. The first step of making the card is preparing the wood grain background. And our goal for the first card is to have the white lines recessed. In order to do this, what you're going to do is take your card that you have trimmed to size. This is unlined, and you're using a scoring tool. In this case, I have a trimmer that has a scoring blade on it. And you do your score lines 1/2 inch apart. See how, as I'm running these through the trimmer, I don't know if you can appreciate it on the camera, you can see that the tool is pressing the cardstock into the groove where I'm running the scoring blade. And it's causing the line to be recessed. Now, for the other card, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm not going to do it on camera because I'm going to illustrate it to you here. Here you can see the lines are recessed, but if I flip it over and I use the opposite side, they're elevated. So you do the same process for this layer on both cards. In one case, you're using the recessed lines, and on the other, you're using the raised side. So that's where you're using your scoring blade, and we're done with that, so we can move it out of the way. So then, the next step is putting the wood grain on your image, and you can use this with any ink pad that is a tone that you might see in wood. And On today's card, I'm using gray, a shade of gray. And so for the first card, I'm using the recessed image. So I'm going to put a glove on because I don't need to have inky fingers. And then I can hold the thing down. But you open up your ink pad and you have your piece of cardstock that you've scored. And I scored these panels at 1/2 inch intervals. And then you just take your ink pad and you just drag it across the piece of cardstock until you get the depth of color that you like. Now in this case, I'm doing the side where I want the lines to be white, and so that's what I do there. Now if I was working on the other card, here you can see the lines are elevated. I do the exact same thing, only this time when I drag the ink pad across, the lines are getting colored because they're elevated. When you're using a drag technique with your ink pad for this kind of process, regardless of what you're making, the pad is only going to highlight the side of the image that is elevated. So now I have my that layer is done for both cards. You see they're opposites. The panels of the wood pick up the gray ink, but in one, the lines between the boards are white, and the other, the lines of the boards are dark. So we'll go on to the next step. Now, I'll show you how to do this, but I'm going to show you what our end goal is. In this example, we are wanting the image to be raised. And I've already embossed this, and you can see that the image is raised. Now, because the embossing folder does both sides of your piece of cardstock, if you can appreciate it on the back, the side we're not going to use here, it is recessed. We're going to take advantage of the recessed image on our next example, but this time we're focusing on this. And so I'm going to show you how we do this image. So this is where I bring in my embossing machine. And if you had seen the first video Nancy and I made together, this is how I prepared all those embossed images. And now this is where you can make a mistake if you're not paying attention. I'm taking one of the panels that has the white lines, because this is the image. Now, if you look at your embossing folder, there are two sides to it. One side is raised, the other side is recessed. Because in this image, we want our flowers to be raised on the side where the lines are. So in order to do that, we've got to find which side of the folder is raised, and in this case, this is the raised side of the embossing folder. This is the white line, so if I put the paper here and I emboss it, the raised side should push through the paper and make the image elevated. If I made a mistake and I put it here over the recessed side, this is going to be against the raised side, and that would make the image recessed. So that would be a mistake. So this is where you have to pay careful attention. You want your white lines away from the elevated side of the folder. So you just position your piece of cardstock there in the folder, and you close it, and then you're ready to run it through the machine. Now, every machine has multiple plates, and depending upon your machine, you have to find the right combination of plates so that you can run it through the machine and put pressure on the folder so that it's going to cause that three-dimensional image to show up. So for my machine, I'm using my 1/2 inch platform, a metal shim, the embossing folder, and then a 3mm plate. So all you have to do is run it through your machine. And if you Want to make sure you get a good impression. You can run it back and forth. Depending on your machine, one time may be sufficient. But then when you take your image out, you can see now that we have a three-dimensional impression of our embossing folder. So we're done with the machine for this one. So here are the samples that I had prepared. You know, I had made the ones in advance and then the one we just ran. So now we're back to playing with our ink pads. And I don't want to mess up the table, so I have some paper here I can work on so that I don't get the ink on the table. So you just select the color that you want to highlight the raised image. Now our goal here is to color in the raised image with the pad, and we're doing a dragging technique just like we did the background. This time I'm using orange. So you just open your pad. I'll move these out of the way. And you drag the pad across the piece of cardstock. And you drag it until you get the depth of color that you're wanting to appear on your cardstock. And you can see that the more I drag it, the more ink I'm depositing on the raised sides. And it is only putting the ink on the elevated portion of the image. So since we're doing this, I'm going to go ahead and quickly drag all three. But you can see it just highlights the raised image. And the more I drag it, the deeper the color becomes. And you drag it until you got the depth of ink exposure that you want for that folder. See? And I'll do the third one. But it's very simple. It looks like it's a lot more complicated than it is, but it's a really quick way that you can apply color to an embossed image. I've played with all kinds of different folders and done this, and I really like it. Okay, so as you can see now, we've got color applied to all the pieces. And now at this point, you've got all your pieces together. All you need to do is assemble it. So let me get this out of the way. Cardstock in the United States comes in 8.5 by 11, and if you cut the sheet in half, you end up with a 5.5 by 8.5, and that's your standard size for making a greeting card in the U.S. And I used my scoring tool to score the paper in half. I've already done this piece. So you see how that's got a raised side, and then this has got a depressed side. And then all you have to do is fold your card on the score line, and you get your card base. And then I trimmed the orange layer, and this is probably a 4 by almost 5.5, because it almost comes to the edges. And you attach that, and then you attached your panel here. And you can do this by any means. You can use liquid glue. You could use a tape runner, or you could use paper tape. I just use paper tape because it's quick, and you can get good coverage or good adhesion. When I like to use the paper tape when I'm using embossing folders, not for this particular layer necessarily, but for the embossed layer, because the embossed layer has elevations and depressions, and because of the elevations and depressions, it doesn't stick to the entire base. But if you use this paper tape, it will adhere tightly to all all the raised sides, and you'll get a good adhesion between the cardstock and your next layer. If you were well, doing this with an audience, it's not as easy as when you're doing it yourself, because I got to get it straight. There we go. Well, boy, now I look like I don't know what I'm doing. Here we go. You want your, that's good enough for government work. All right, here I am. I'm putting the paper tape now on the elevated image. Now, this side, because the elevated side of the image is the one we put the color on. This is the recessed image, but you can see that the tape is only going to stick to the flat part of the plate, not the entire thing. And here we go. It's easier to take your tape off if you use a tweezer. Some people, they got long nails and they're able to peel the backing off easier than me, but it's not going as well for me. I've never done a tape like this where I'm actually demonstrating the card while I'm making it, so I'm sorry if I appear a little awkward. Boy, I didn't get that whole strip either. What is it, Murphy's Law, that anything that can go wrong will? Well, that's what I feel right now. Okay, now you have your panel with your adhesive attached, and you just kind of line it up on your paper and try and get your edges straight. And there you go. At the final step for this card, I prepared this in advance. I wrapped 2 different kinds of yarn around the length of the card, 3 lengths, 1, 2, 3. And that's how much I wanted. And so I just chose to combine 2 different colors of yarn that complemented my color scheme. And you just wrap it around the card form. And then down here you just tie it in a knot. And then you're good to go. I made my little tags by just stamping "Love You" on a little orange rectangle, and I hit a 2-hole punch. You can see that here. And then I threaded the 1 piece of yarn through it. So that is my finished card. And I like the way that turned out. Now, I'll make these later, but we can go on to the second example. Now, I showed you how the lines on this card, I'm taking advantage of the raised lines, and I have one that we just drug the ink on. Got a couple of them prepared so that they're ready for us. Now, in this run through, we want the ink to be pushed into the paper so that the colored image is recessed instead of elevated. So instead of embossing it and then adding the color, we are going to add the color while we emboss it. And the way you do this is by taking your ink pad and applying it direct to the paper. Now again, we have an elevated side and we have a recessed side. Because we want the ink pushed into the paper, you need to take advantage of the elevated side of the folder. But in this circumstance, what we're doing is, instead of trying to add the ink after the impression is already made, we're going to add the ink while we're making the impression. And what you do is you take your pad and you put the ink direct on the folder. So you just take these pads are really easy to clean. You just run them under tap water, so you don't have to be afraid of getting ink on the plastic. So you can see that I've applied the orange ink to the folder directly. Okay. Now we take one of our panels with the raised lines. We want the image on the same side as this, so the ink has to face this side. So in this case, I'm putting the raised lines in the same direction as the ink. Well, we don't want to smear it. That would happen if I tried to lay it here. So in this case, what we do is we put it on the opposite side of the folder, position it where we want it, and then we close the lid on that. So then it's inside our sandwich. The side with the line is facing the side of the folder that we applied the ink to. Then we bring back our embossing machine. And again, we've got our 1/2-inch platform. I've got my metal shim, we've got the embossing folder, and then we've got a cutting plate. And this, once again, we're just running it through the machine. Now, you can see how the ink is embedded in the thing. Now, if that's not dark enough to suit you and you want to try and make the ink a little bit darker, don't take your paper out of the thing. It's still recessed into that folder. Well, it was. But you ink up your... I want to ink up Nancy's sewing table. You ink up your folder again. Okay. Now, because it's got a 3D too, you slide it and make sure it's locked into that folder so that you're getting the same image, and then you close it. And you run it through your embossing machine. You see how that's a little darker because I ran it through twice. So it's got a good deposition of ink. So now we just put our card together the same way as we did our previous card. We've got our gray base, our orange layer, and then our embossed piece. I'm not going to bore you by doing it twice because it's the same concept. And I'm going to put it together off camera, and then I'll come back and we'll look at the cards again. Okay, here we're back where we started, and I've got the finished cards. Now again, the difference between the two. We drug the ink on the recessed lines so that they showed up white. Then we put the recessed lines facing the depressed side of the folder, because when we wanted I'm sorry, I'm saying it backwards. Because the lines are recessed, we want the image raised. So we put the blank side of the paper, the side of the card that is not colored, we put that against the raised side of the folder so that when it runs through the machine, the images are elevated. So the gray colored side of the paper you want away from the raised side of the folder so that when you run it through the machine, the image is elevated, and then we just drag our ink pad across it. And then the opposite card, we drug the ink over the raised lines, and because we want the image to be recessed, we want the raised lines away from the raised side of the folder, so that, let me make sure I'm saying this right, because when you're not doing it, it can be confusing. You want the image to be recessed, so you want the raised side of the folder facing the raised lines so that the raised side of the folder that you've applied your ink to will press into the paper. So you put your ink on the raised side of the embossing folder, and you put the gray side facing the raised side of the folder with the ink so that the image is impressed into the paper and it's recessed. and it's best to put it on the opposite side facing that, so that when you close your folder, you're bringing the ink toward the paper instead of putting the paper on the ink. Otherwise, you might smear the ink on parts of the cardstock that you don't want. So, once again, this is carved wood. Two techniques that are opposites. And I hope you enjoyed watching this with me today.
Okay, thanks for sharing with us, Karen. I hope you all enjoyed this, and maybe something you might like to try yourself.
And I went ahead and put all the cards together, the pieces that we made during the demonstration. And I hope you learned something new today. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And if you haven't subscribed, please do hit the little notification bell, and I will be back in my next video. For the ones of you who've been watching, I'm still working on my dress from the wheel, and as soon as that is finished, I will record a video and show you my new make, and of course spin the wheel again to see what's next. Y'all take care. Bye-bye.